Hello, and welcome into another episode of Lessons in Product Management. I'm your host, John Fontenot. And on today's episode, we have a very special return guest in Irene Yu, who's the founder and CEO of SkipLevel, which focuses on helping product managers become more technical. If you didn't hear the first episode with Irene, it's in the top 10 of all my most downloaded episodes for good reason. Irene dropped insight after insight into what it means for product managers to be more technical and how and why she left Amazon as a software engineer after seeing product managers who struggled with technical concepts and dedicated her time and her career to helping PMs up level on the right level of technicality to be helpful for their engineering counterparts, which is incredibly important, especially in this age where generative AI is kind of taking over everything, and PMs are left wondering, like, what do I do, right? There's this new technical concept they need to learn. What's the difference between, Gen AI with like large language models versus image generation versus training data, fine tuning versus training models? Like, what does all this mean? So I asked Irene to come back because I love her insights, and she's been writing about how AI is going to change the PM's role, kind of the timeline of what we're looking at, and why it's so important to have that technical foundation to help set the right basis for being a successful PM and being a successful partner to our engineering counterparts as things continue to progress and evolve and in kind of this inflection point in technology. So really excited for you to hear what Irene has to say. I've linked the article that I've referenced in the show notes. You should go read it. We're going to talk all about it in this episode of how AI is going to impact the role of product management. So with no further ado, here's the conversation with Irene. Hey, Irene, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, John. It's so good to be back. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's so good to have you back. So, for the listener that didn't hear the first episode, Irene came on like a year or two ago and talked about what she was doing with SkipLevel, which I'll have her introduce in just a second, and how PMs can be more technical and what that actually means. And it's still one of the top 10 episodes that I've ever done. So, really excited to have you back and do another one.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk more about technical leadership for product managers. It's one of my favorite topics.
Awesome. Awesome. So for the listener that didn't hear that episode or is first time hearing from you, could you give a brief background of yourself and what you're doing with SkipLevel?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Irene. I am the CEO and founder of SkipLevel. I'll kind of go back to my background a little bit. I'm a software engineer by training. I've been a software engineer about 9 years, and I've worked at many companies, different types of companies, mid-sized startups, Amazon, agencies. And while I was a software engineer, one of the main themes that I noticed was that all the product managers and designers and really anyone that wasn't an engineer that I worked with really struggled to understand software and technology. Obviously, for product managers, this definitely affected the product, affected the team collaboration, affected communication, and I kind of saw what a big skills gap it was. And a lot of the product managers that I worked with directly and that I ultimately ended up mentoring really I saw that they really wanted to become more technical and really wanted to know how to work better with engineers, and so that kind of experience as a software engineer working very closely with and mentoring product managers throughout my career really was the inspiration for me to found SkipLevel. And ultimately our mission is to bring technical leadership, technical literacy to the tech industry, and not just for software engineers but product managers and really everyone else.
Yeah, I love it. So I'm a graduate of the SkipLevel program, and it's paid dividends in my career. Like the conversations pre SkipLevel and post SkipLevel, like you saw the engineer's eyes open, like, oh, John, there you go.
I love that. That's like the best reward. I love it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So for this episode, you wrote an article recently, published back in January, called "How AI is Impacting the PM Role." And I was super fascinated by it and had a ton of questions. So I wanted to unpack some of those questions and kind of follow up from what you posted. So for the listener, I will link that article in the show notes. So go and read it. But here's the follow up questions to what you wrote. So you ready?
Yeah, I am ready.
Okay, awesome. So one of the first things that stuck out, and I'll tell you why this was so interesting to me, but you mentioned how the timeline to the PM role shifting due to AI is
Mm.
you're kind of measuring that in years. And as a PM, I feel like the sky is falling down all around me. Like I have to hurry up and learn everything. So I'm curious, like how do you see this playing out, and why do you see that time horizon?
Yeah, I get why why it feels like the shift is happening in months. I mean, there's a lot of noise, right? Like between news headlines, social media posts, job postings, it does seem like everyone is suddenly an AI expert. And if you're not an AI expert, you're like behind, which is kind of crazy. But I think if you look past the surface, I think the actual shift in how PMs work, the real adoption, like industry wide, I think is still moving much more slowly. But the caveat here, and I will say this, I should clarify that how quickly AI is being adopted does depend on a number of factors. I think that includes the size of the company, whether it's a tech company or a tech-enabled company, and
Mm,
how technical the workforce and leadership is already. So if you're at a scrappy startup and it's like a tech startup, your product is actually software, and also if you have a leader who's just more technical, chances are AI is being adopted quickly. But if you're a very large company, and a company's that's tech enabled, it's not actually a tech company, but they have software to enable their core business, right? They're probably going to be a lot more slow to adopt.
mm,
Um, but for companies that are less tech and bigger in general, I think there are three main reasons why the shift will take longer than just a few months. I do think it will take a year or two. The first is that the real change requires shifts at an organizational level.
mm,
The second is, I think, the AI fluency, like I mentioned. The third is there are societal risks and influences um, to just aversion and trust, especially with perceived job replacement, right?
mm.
And that's kind of happening already. So when I say that real change requires shifts at an organizational level, what I mean is that individual product managers are not going to have the same wide enough influence, right, as leaders. That's just the truth. So I think in order for PM roles to fundamentally shift to align with AI, it would require a mindset shift at an organizational level and some serious discussions regarding legal, security, ethics, trademarks. Again, the larger the company is, the more pronounced these risks are. And these are all kind of really complicated things to figure out. It's not really a plug and play situation. And again, the bigger the org, um, the longer it's going to take to kind of work these kinks out. And then in order for there to be organizational level change, there has to be AI fluency amongst leaders and individual ICs. And I don't necessarily mean they have to be so technical, but they have to have some sort of fluency. And I don't know about you, but AI is coming out so quickly. It's very hard to stay up.
It
Uh,
is.
yeah, and AI can feel complicated. I mean, just looking at general technical literacy, basically what, skip level taught, just about software development. Most product managers already struggle with it. And
Yep.
now you have AI on top of it. So this is not easy stuff to adopt new technology. We also saw this with the cloud. When the cloud first came out, which wasn't even that long ago, I don't think, it was the talk of the town. But there are still product managers now who don't really know what the cloud is or how it works and is very dependent on engineers to make decisions on infrastructure and, cloud services. So I think for those reasons, industry wide, I think that companies are starting to kind of understand what changes in AI really mean for them. But I also think the goalpost is still moving really quickly because there's a bit of an arms race happening with AI companies like ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and many more players that exist now, but also that will continue to see in the future. DeepSeek, sorry.
No, no, you're good. Yeah, so I think there's two takeaways there. I think the first one, implicitly, what you're saying is that skip level graduates already have a leg up because now you have the foundation and now you're ready to move on to AI literacy.
Right. Yeah. It's going to be very difficult to understand AI. You just don't understand, like the foundations, because AI at the end of the day is just software. It is still software. So it still operates by a lot of the same rules that
Hmm.
all other technologies, have to abide by.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the second big takeaway is this almost feels like, there's like the innovation adoption curve, right? Where you have the innovators, the early adopters, all the way down to the laggards. And it feels like the way you're thinking about this is AI and company adoption is kind of the same way, where some like startups who are building their startup off of AI, obviously they're going to be AI first. But when you go to like legacy businesses or tech enabled businesses, they might be more of the laggards in the market who are maybe not even enabled technically within their own organization to be able to adopt AI today just because they're that far behind.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I think infrastructure has a lot to do with it as well. So it just, across the board, it just depends on which company we're really looking at. Yeah, a lot of the leaders that I've spoken to that work at large companies in San Francisco, they're telling me, yeah, it's pretty slow to adopt on the ground. You
Hmm.
have product managers kind of individually, if they're very interested in AI, they're using AI tools and they're using AI tools to help them with, creating a PRD or do competitive analysis, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yeah.
ultimately that broader, organizational change really just has to come from top.
Yeah. So you're seeing and what you're hearing, especially in like the Silicon Valley area, is PMs are quicker to adopt it with their day-to-day workflow, but like actually getting it into the product and touching the customer, that's a much slower adoption curve.
Yeah, right. Those are two different things. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. Cool. So one of the other things that stuck out to me from the article was this mentality shift from like a feature first shift to AI capabilities. And I play around with AI tools just like the PMs that you mentioned, and I'm always finding out new things and new ways that AI can solve problems. Um, how are you thinking about this kind of feature first shift to AI capability versus maybe a more traditional way that we thought about new features?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So I'll just give a little bit of context for those who didn't read the article that I wrote about what, features first mindset is
Yeah.
and what AI capabilities thinking mindset is. So um so it's it's kind of a fundamental shift between how we think about how we solve customer problems, right? So
Mm-hmm.
traditionally, when product managers think about solving a customer problem, you start with identifying what the user problem is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come up with a specific fixed feature or features to solve that specific problem. So for example, the example that I used, a very common user, problem is search. So I want to quickly find a product. So let's say I go on to Amazon and say I want to buy a dress. Right? It's a very simple, search. And then the actual feature would be, it's a search bar and there'd be some filters. So that's traditional features first thinking.
Mm-hmm.
AI capabilities mindset, that same user, instead of searching for dress, they might ask an AI chatbot, show me wedding dresses under $100 that would work for a summer wedding. Now, this is very different because the AI could say, okay, it would work for a summer wedding. That means we can't have long sleeves. That means, we probably don't want black dresses, right? So it can extrapolate all of this data that would be very hard to do with a fixed feature, right? So users now, now they don't have to click on these search filters, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this is a very small example of that shift. And AI models are now coming out every day for very specific niche problems that are custom to each industry that can solve custom problems within each industry. So I think with that in mind, now that we have the power of AI, we're shifting from a features first mindset to an AI capabilities thinking mindset. And the what it really comes down to is, do you want to stay competitive in the market? whichever company is able to deliver customer value quicker, more efficiently, more effectively, will have the leg up in the market. So I think now that we have this power now with AI, I think product managers um, should and will first think about whether AI is the best solution for the customer problem. I don't think it always will be. But certainly we are moving into this new era, right? This new way of thinking where AI solutions should always be a consideration. Um, I do think, and maybe this will, peter out as the generations get older, but I think there will always be some sort of attachment to more simple fixed features. A
Hmm.
really good example is like Craigslist. Craigslist is still, it's booming. It's doing great. And if you go to their UI, it's like back in like the 1980s.
Yeah.
Um, and there's something about that people really love, right? So I think I don't think again, uh, using AI for everything is always going to be the best solution. I don't, so I don't think it should always be like AI first, but I think like AI should always be part of the conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think even within our startup, to Lumina, that I worked for, that we've seen like AI capabilities unlocking our ability to solve problems we didn't know that we could solve.
Mhm.
And so
Right.
it's kind of shifted our prioritization where we were focused on kind of the fixed feature reporting engine that we felt like needed to be great to land these deals to, oh, now we can actually like unlock or unblock this mental friction customers have of onboarding because it takes a while to onboard, get all your policies and procedures, all your tasks, and AI can just create those for you. And so now instead of taking a couple months to onboard a couple hundred employees, you could do it in a couple days. And
Yeah.
so not to like pitch the product that I'm working on, but it's just an example of like how it's unlocking our ability to solve problems in new ways, but also unlock problems that we couldn't solve in the past.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And also being able to solve being able to solve multiple problems at once. So
Yeah,
if you do features first thinking, again, it's one problem and you create a fixed feature to solve that specific problem. But AI kind of, is more capable of intelligent thinking, right? So yeah, it's pretty cool.
yeah, for sure, for sure. So there was also some commentary, and this is something that like I've written about, I've heard other people talking about on other podcasts. And I think it's so fascinating that there's kind of this convergence of thought around this, but I want to get your take on it. So you mentioned like PM skills bleeding over into UX and development and how AI is kind of enabling this. And I started my PM career as a UX researcher. I dabbled in UX design, and so and I do no code development. So I kind of feel like I touch different spaces, but I've also found that in some cases I step on toes when I don't mean to. And so like as this convergence happens and this like overlap in roles kind of naturally take place, like I guess how do you see that evolving, and then how do you suggest PMs navigate that world?
Yeah, I
Big
think this,
question.
yeah, because it's kind of personal, right? Like it touches on
Yeah.
people a little bit of like core, I don't know what it's like core feelings of being useful, uh, being someone of value, right? Like, being able to generate value in a very capitalist system, um, but also their jobs.
Hmm.
My God, you're taking my job, like I could get fired if I'm not doing anything. So I totally understand the tension. You're not alone in feeling that tension. I think that even before AI, the lines between PM, design, engineer can get a little bit blurry, especially if a PM has engineer background or an engineer has design background, right? It just naturally gets a little blurry. And I think that's natural. I think that's just human nature. Now with AI tools lowering the barrier even more to things like wireframing, prototyping, and even code generation, I think it makes a lot of sense that product managers are naturally starting to explore these areas more, especially the more curious product managers like yourself, John. And so it can feel understandably kind of encroaching. My Again, this goes back to talking about decisions on an organizational level. That could be like small team level, but also just, company wide. Um, I think leadership should actually be setting the norm for what the collaborative process now looks like for cross-functional teams. For example, during the discovery process, should product managers be the ones creating prototypes and mockups? Or should that ownership still be on the part of a designer or an engineer? And if the designer isn't doing mockups anymore, then what do they spend their time doing? That is now freed up. So ultimately, it kind of comes down to essentially, and this is so cliche, open communication and aligning on expectations. And I've totally seen this happen. Some like even on my own team, when you have someone who's like very curious and loves to do, and they're just moving, and not bringing everyone along with them, right? And like letting people know, like, hey, I'm doing this. Like I know you're doing that, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
Um, and because AI is changing the way that everyone works, not just PM stepping into designer and dev roles. So designers write prompts, engineers do UX, marketers can write code to an extent. So roles are becoming more fluid now, and these tools are available. And I think that teams have to work together to really embrace being fluid without becoming territorial. And again, aligning expectations and just saying, communicating before you just actively do does go a really long way. And ultimately, also keeping in mind, that these things touch core sensitivities to people that are very understandable. Again, being someone of value and also people's jobs.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The optimistic side of me says that this shift to like AI touching every part of our day-to-day workflow and kind of the overlap of PMs doing UX stuff or creating these quick prototypes, it should just enable better collaboration, right? Because like at the end of the day, engineering still has to like implement the final product. UX
Yep.
still needs to like be the expert in their role. But if a designer communicates visually and a PM is not very good at design, but through a prompt, AI can help bring to life what's in the PM's mind. I think that's just, benefits all around.
Totally. Yep.
Yep. Cool. Well, on a similar note to that, there's this book Shape Up that I wrote that I didn't write, but I read like a few years ago that kind of advocated that like in the early discovery phase and kind of the initial design phase, like one or two people at most should get in a room and like really crank things out and not bring a whole bunch of people together. But I've also seen that like kind of bite me in my career as well. So what are your thoughts around kind of the isolationist, like for lack of better terms, approach to early discovery and design as opposed to working with larger teams as it relates to kind of how AI is shifting how much we can do with just one person?
Yeah, I think we're going to, truthfully, I think we're going to see a growing trend towards smaller teams. In fact, it's not really a trend anymore. I think it's happening now as we speak.
Yeah.
Small teams, depending on the size of the company, one or two or three, handling more of the early stage work. And I don't think that's a problem, by the way, having a small team handle the early stage work because that discovery process, I don't know that necessarily needs that many people.
Mm-hmm.
I think the AI is definitely accelerating that. So tools like ChatGPT, Midjourney, Replit, Claude, right? Let you go,
Mm-hmm.
not Claude, but let you go from idea to concept to prototype very shockingly fast. Even I was blown away. So I think it becomes really tempting for one person, often the PM, to just run with it without looping others in because, there's that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So,
Mm-hmm.
you during that discovery process, there are benefits to going fast, right? And when you go fast, it's easy to not loop other people in because there's a cost to bringing people. There's a communication cost, right? That said, just because you can go fast solo doesn't always mean that you should, especially when you're building products for real people in complex environments. I totally get the appeal of the one or two scrappy folks shaping it out model. If you want to go fast, you want to go alone. I think in some cases, like early validation or internal tooling, it works really well. But again, I think over time, if you're consistently excluding voices that, especially perspectives that are different from you, you don't really get an opportunity to discover the unknown unknowns, right?
Hmm.
And it can lead to, from a team perspective, misalignment, lack of ownership, and just blind spots in the product because that's early. Later on, you still need people to help you in order to build the thing, right? Which is a lot more complex. So what I have found is helpful is thinking of AI as a drafting partner as a way to accelerate the messy exploratory parts of discovery, so that you can bring the team ultimately like better research, better artifacts, better ideas to get their reaction to. So instead of showing up to a meeting with a blank doc or really, really bad mock-ups, showing up with an AI generated concept or prototype that sparks conversation and sparks idea, I think is really great. I think it shifts the role of collaboration from brainstorming from scratch to being able to shape and discuss and critique together, which can be actually be very effective. And this all goes back to the idea of ownership, right? Which back when I um, was working as a software engineer, that was like a really big thing. Like you own a feature, you own a task, and then you are also responsible for communicating that to the rest of the team. So I think the key is to be intentional, use AI to move fast, but I don't think you should let speed become the reason to like skip alignment. You still want
Hmm.
to like in early, not necessarily to do the actual lead work, but to co-own the direction and to be able to identify any blind spots that you might not know is actually there. And I think that's how you get the best of both worlds, velocity and also buy-in.
Yeah, I agree. Like from what I'm hearing, like AI is really good at solving the cold start problem. Like you don't have to start from scratch every time. You can get some really quick ideas and be able to brainstorm quickly through AI generated UI or code or whatever it's pumping out for you. But what AI does not abdicate you of is still your responsibility for empathy and those interpersonal relationships and the need for alignment. Because like the biggest fear I think from a disciplinary standpoint is the PM saying, "Oh, I have access to code and UI and all these things. Now I really can be the Steve Jobs and the CEO of the product." And
Yeah.
I think those behaviors are still anti patterns, and the
Uh-huh.
behaviors we've been pushing for collaboration, alignment, and empathy are still paramount.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you.
Awesome. So I feel like as a former UX researcher and someone who's a big fan of the UX discipline, I feel like there's already an underutilization in like that role is kind of undervalued in too many companies. So do you see AI as like a potentially creating a trend more to make things like UX research and design easier for PMs to take on? Like, do you see that as a risk in organizations where they're like, oh, if we're concerned about profits or budget, then we start truly consolidating some of these roles into one? I think you've seen it with like Airbnb doing PM and product marketing is one thing, and I've heard it from other organizations as well. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this ties back to our conversation about how AI is affecting roles.
Hmm.
Um, I'm trying to think of like a really good way to word it, but I think first, you're right. UX and UX research has historically been undervalued a lot in orgs, because it's not seen as essential, right? Like
Hmm.
software engineering,
Unfortunately,
right? Software engineering that is seen as essential.
yeah.
Ultimately build, and UX and having UX isn't seen as essential. And I think AI risks definitely amplify that even more if we're not careful. Because now PMs suddenly have the tools to run quick usability tests, synthesize user interviews, or generate wireframes. I think it can create the illusion that we no longer need specialists. And I think that here. Um, but yeah, I think just because like AI allows people who don't specialize in a certain role to be able to do some of the things that these specialized roles do, I think it's a really shallow read of what specialized roles actually bring to the table. I'll give you an example. I have some experience in actually doing design. Actually, before I did coding, I actually did design. And before I worked with some amazing designers, I would have been like, yeah, I'm good at design. And then I meet these amazing designers. I'm like, oh no, I'm not. I'm not good at design, and it also takes a designer to know like what to even ask ChatGPT, like
Hmm.
what to even prompt it with.
Yep.
It's like, I mean, John, technically you can ask the AI to code for you, but are you going to be able to really be able to know, oh, is this code correct? Is it good code? Is it going down the wrong direction? And is there like a bug that AI accidentally introduced because the prompt that I wrote was wrong, right? So
Hmm.
it still kind of takes that specialized understanding to be able to come up with something really good. Um, so what I think AI is doing again is it's making some tasks easier, like
Hmm.
generating persona, summarizing transcripts, or even mocking up basic flows. But I don't think that it can replace the depth of insight that skilled UX researchers uncover through real human interactions that they have had over the course of however many years they've been doing this actual work. I don't think it can replace the systems thinking, the accessibility expertise, the emotional nuance that, experienced UX designers really bring. So yes, there's a risk that some orgs will see AI as a way to cut corners and lean on PMs to do more with less. But I think that the smarter orgs will use AI to really elevate these specialized roles. Um, so it's really more about being able to do more at a higher quality and faster than it is about getting rid of UX and, specialized.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. And I hope that the product leaders listening to this take it to heart because you used the word shallow. And I think that's such a great word to use because like working in a 10-person startup, I wear a lot of hats. And I feel like sometimes my work can get shallow because I'm stretched so thin, I can't go deep on a particular area as much as I want to. And I think that's the reality you create when you start consolidating roles too much, is you never get to the depth of insight or the depth of work that really differentiates your product and your company from the competition. And so I think the other word you used was smart companies. I think the smart ones will realize that or learn the hard way. So
Yeah, I think if you have the resources, I think it is the smarter thing to continue to invest in specialized roles and just know that AI is being used as a way to, work faster. And yeah.
yep. No, awesome. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a couple of technical questions while we're on the call. And I did have a couple as it relates to AI because I think that as PMs try to demystify this world that's ever changing and evolving and complex, I think two major themes kind of come to mind around like data and models. And so I have a couple questions there. So the first one I have is when it comes to data, like what are some of the core aspects of data or core concepts as it relates to AI that PM should understand or be studying up on?
Oh man, so much. Data is data is absolutely fundamental to AI. Not just fundamental, but like foundational to AI, right? It is the raw material that powers everything in AI. Without AI, I'm sorry, without data, there is no AI. So for product managers looking to build or even just use AI responsively, in in a more responsible way and effectively, there are definitely a few key areas to focus on. I think the first and most basic is to understand data quality. AI is only as good as the data that it's trained on. PM should understand why. So if if what I just said, AI is only as good as the data it's trained on, and anyone listening to this is like, but why? Okay, this is an area to really go into, right? So product managers should understand what makes data clean or usable. So traits like consistency, accuracy, completeness, and whether it's labeled properly, right? If the data is an image of a dog and it's labeled a cat, the AI is going to use that and it's not going to have good results, right? So as far as technical terminology, understanding what is structured and unstructured data, which by the way isn't even exactly AI. It's just like fundamental data
Hmm.
knowledge. And then also what is labeled and unlabeled data. So that a very good example, labeled data is just images that go into an AI and you don't necessarily tell it, what it is. But you kind of teach it to be able to recognize that pattern. That's data that's unlabeled. And then labeled data is you feed it the data and you tell it exactly what it is. Right? The second is data bias. This is really huge. If your training data is skewed, your AI will be too. Product managers don't need to be data scientists, but you should be able to ask questions like, where is this data coming from? Who's included and who is not? Now, this one's very important. Who's included and who's not? Could this model behave unfairly towards certain user groups? So if all of your data is, let's say, inputs from a specific racial group, a specific gender group, and then someone of the opposite gender or use, your product, the AI could behave in a way or respond in a way that can be offensive to the user or just not in line with what the user needs are, right? Another big one is data privacy and security. With AI, especially when models are trained on user data, there are some real risks around PII exposure, consent compliance. So product managers should have a basic understanding of regulations like GDPR and know when to pull in legal teams to, kind of understand what are the risks. And then I think there's data pipelines and infrastructure. This one's more technical. You don't have to learn how to architect data infrastructure or pipeline, but you should know what it takes to collect, store, process, and feed data into an AI model. Again, a lot of this doesn't even have to do with AI. Data pipelines exist now pre-AI, ELT, ETL.
Hmm.
You need to understand what a vector database is at a high level. You do not have to go deep into the mechanics of it. Just being able to, kind of understand the infrastructure and the pipeline that actually supports, feeding data into any of these models will, be able to help you scope features better and collaborate more effectively with teams. And then I think that the final one I would say is PM should understand the concept of feedback loops. So how AI systems learn and evolve over time based on user interaction and new data. This has direct implications for product strategy, UX, and how you measure success. And there are risks here too, because you can have bad actors that can flood your AI chatbot, and if uh, with information that is bad, like meant to um, just feed bad data into your AI, or kind of extract information from your AI. Um, like these are all risks to consider. So you really have to think about the feedback loop and knowing how to kind of tie up that loose end. So to summarize, I think I said data quality, data privacy and security, bias, the technical portions, pipelines, infrastructure, and then the feedback loops. And if you can speak to even a little bit to these areas, you'll not only be able to make better product decisions, but you'll earn a lot more credibility with your engineering teams.
Yeah,
And also,
makes total sense. Thanks for unpacking that, because I know there's a lot there. So being able to filter through like what are some of the most important things I should be focused on or reading up on is huge.
yep. Yeah, that terminology, just, practice speaking a little bit, using a little bit more of the technical, language, understanding kind of the trade-offs and, the critical thinking behind it, will go a really long way.
Awesome. So before we wrap up, I have one more technical question as it relates to AI around training models. So I worked in a fintech company where we weren't using, LLMs, and there was a lot of hesitance to do so, going back to a previous point around kind of the adoption curve. And there was kind of like long-standing models like nearest neighbors and things like that that are pretty well known that were utilized. But as PMs are trying to get into the AI space, I think that there's a lot of demand for PMs who want to work as a quote AI PM. Um, as we're looking to maybe make those shifts or go to those startups working on these problems, are you seeing more utilization from like off the shelf LLMs like from OpenAI, or are you seeing kind of still kind of that hesitance that I experienced where people are using kind of the tried and true models versus going all in on the new LLMs?
Hmm. Yeah, I totally understand the confusion here. It is confusing because you have conversations about AI where it's like training a model, and then you have conversations about using existing models, and and especially for those that aren't like well versed in AI, it is confusing.
Yeah.
Um, and it directly impacts the product management role. So I would say the short answer is no. Most PMs don't need to know how to train their own models. I mean, it's pretty complicated to create a model. You need a ton of data to train a model. So it's very often overkill for most use cases, especially again when there's like very high quality tested by machine learning experts off the shelf models like OpenAI's APIs or Claude. Um, it will get you like a solid 85% to 90% of the way there. Not just for product managers, by the way, but like most engineers, uh, you know, like building software, they're not creating their own models, or they're like using existing ones. So I think that the real skill for PMs is knowing how to frame the problem. Again, going back to the product management space, what are you trying to solve? Is it a classification problem, a recommendation? Is it language generation, right? Like what is the best AI model that will solve that specific user problem that you're trying to actually create? And then evaluating whether existing models or APIs can handle that. That is not any different than being able to do third-party um, integration research that product managers should be able to do now. Um, I'm definitely seeing a trend where PMs are expected to have enough technical literacy um, in general, but also in AI, right? Understanding how models like ChatGPT, Claude work, being able to collaborate effectively with ML engineers, or just engineers that are like actually creating AI features, data
Mhm.
scientists, and understanding the risks and limitations of AI models. One of the things that as I've spoken to engineers about is they're like, yeah, if product managers could help me write a good prompt to mitigate some of these AI models from doing things that we don't want to do, and doing some of that critical thinking would be amazing. I think that custom training and fine tuning is usually reserved for more edge cases. Like if you have proprietary data, you have a very specific use case that you need to feed specific company data into the model, or like high accuracy requirements that generic models can't meet. Again, very specific. But I think even then, the PM's role isn't to build a model, it's just to understand why a custom solution might be needed. Um, and be able to provide any information to the engineer in order to help them, create whatever solution it is that is needed. And then how that decision impacts roadmap, resourcing, and risk, and providing, just any general help. Again, it's not that different from what it is now, working with, engineers on just software development. So again, PMs don't need to build models, but they do absolutely need to understand the landscape and how it's changing now. And that's why technical fluency and literacy is so important. It's not about coding, it's just being able to make smart product decisions in this new era.
Yeah, I completely agree. Having worked with non-technical founders, I think there's a lot of misconceptions even outside of the PMs, well, especially outside of the PM space where there's less technical people, right? Where I heard a founder once say, like, we need to train our models, we need to train our models. And I'm like, I don't think you know what that means to train a model. And so being able to explain and unpack the definition of like what's training a model foundationally versus fine tuning versus using methods like RAG, and being able to understand when certain methods apply to the problem that you're trying to solve, going back to your point about focusing on the problem. And then if you don't know, you could ask ChatGPT, be like, here's my situation. What do you recommend that I do?
Yeah, totally. Another really great use case for AI.
For sure, for sure. So, Irene, this has been great. So glad you've been able to come back on for PMs who feel like they don't have that good foundation in their technical literacy or competencies, even pre AI. I know we've kind of talked about it, but what would you recommend next steps for them?
That's a great question. I think a lot of PMs feel that way, even if they're too afraid to admit it. That's okay. That's very normal. The truth is, I think AI is a hot topic right now. At the end of the day, like I said, AI it's just software. It's part of software. It has to operate by the same rules. If you do not have a strong foundation in how software gets built, what goes into that, APIs, databases, system architecture, the process of building software, it's going to be really hard to lead technical conversations, let alone build products that incorporate AI responsibly and effectively. So that's why I created the SkipLevel program. It is designed specifically for product managers who don't have a technical background but want to level up fast without having to learn how to code. You learn how modern software works, how to talk to engineers with confidence, how to break down technical trade-offs. And once you have that solid foundation, it's going to be a lot easier to start layering AI concepts on top of it, right? What makes a model work well? What kind of data does it need? What are the architectural or ethical implications of this? We've had, I don't know how many students we trained, but like many at this point, but students from Meta, Amazon, John, the smaller startups, all say the same thing. They're able to connect the dots in a way that no other resource has been able to do for them. So if you're feeling behind, you're definitely not alone. You're probably the norm. But the good news is it's all 100% learnable, it's accessible. And once you build that base, everything from AI to infra to architecture will start making a lot more sense.
Yeah,
So check out SkipLevel.
absolutely. I went from like being a permanent shruggy emoji to being a lot more confident in my conversation. So definitely recommend the SkipLevel program.
Amazing.
Irene, thanks again for coming back on. It was so good to have you back, and I'm sure this will skyrocket back up to the top 10 as well.
I'm excited, and I hope I get invited back for a third episode.
Can promise that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John.
Yep, thanks, Irene. Thank you for joining us for another lesson in product management. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a rating and review to let us know how we're doing, how we can improve, and ideas for future episodes. Until the next lesson in product management, go out and kill it.